Hi, welcome to the Personal History Hub. Today we're going to be looking at the narrative account question. So this question is often quite dreaded by students, but don't worry about it. We're going to break it down a lot today and really think about what the question asks us and what we need to do to be able to nail this question. So it's worth 8 marks and it appears on paper 2 in the Cold War section only. So that's the only time you'll have to answer this question. So even if you think you get to year 11 and you really don't understand this question still, okay, you only do have to do it once, okay? But by the end of this video, you should be a little bit more clear on what you need to do to succeed in this question. So let's have a look at an example that we can work through and break down together. So this is the example we're going to have a look at. So let's read the question together. It says, write a narrative account analysing the key events of the peace conferences in the years 1943 to 45. You may use the following in your answer. So they give you the Tehran Conference in 1943 and the Potsdam Conference in 1945. So we're going right back to the very start of the Cold War course here. We're thinking about the peace conferences. Let's just very quickly, before I share some kind of broken down topics with you, read this top bracket of the mark scheme here, so the 6 to 8 marks. So it says a narrative. When we talk about narrative, what we really mean is a story. So with this one, you're kind of storytelling and you're linking, showing the links between events or between key elements of an event. Okay. And it's given organises material into a clear sequence of events leading to an outcome. So that leading to an outcome gives us a bit of a clue as to what we need to do in our final paragraph. So we're going to need to sum everything up, say what the final outcome was. The account of events analyses the links between them. So that gives us a clue that we need to kind of be linking the events together. So how are these linked in a little chain? So think about it like a little chain of events. And is coherent and logically structured. When it says coherent and logically structured, it means that it's got to be in chronological order. So I've seen some teachers calling this question the chrono-link question because it's got to be chronological and you've got to be linking them together. That's quite a good way to describe this question, really. So if you want to start calling it the chrono-link question rather than the narrative account, that's fine because it might get you to think about what you need to do to nail this question. Okay, so just a couple of top tips then. I would spend around 10 minutes on this question in the exam. However, because the 3 questions on Elizabeth you will have seen before on paper 1 and you might be a little bit more confident in answering those styles of questions, if you wanted to spend a little bit more time on this one, say 12 to 15 minutes, that's fine, okay? If you think you'll be able to get the 12 and 16 marker on Elizabeth done a bit quicker, then you can with the narrative account because you've not had as much practice on this type of question. It's fine to spend about 15 minutes on this one. Okay, so because it is worth the same amount of marks as the 2 consequences question, this one, but there is arguably more to put in this. You're going to be saying more, writing more. Okay. So you need 3 paragraphs, like we kind of determined in the mark scheme. To get in those top mark band, you have to come up with a point of your own. So they'll give you 2 things in the question. Okay, this is quite different to you can go off those if you want to, but often you will need to use those 2. So for example, with peace conferences, there was only 3 peace conferences. Okay, so we have to use Tehran, Potsdam, and we have to think about what is the actual, and we have to fill that in ourselves. Some of them, so for example, the narrative account, if it's a given narrative account of détente, there's lots of different things you could use for that. So if you didn't want to use the 2 given in the question, but quite often it will be 3 clear events that you must use, or 3 key sections, say start, middle, end of an event that you must use. Okay, so just be mindful, you really do need to know your stuff for this paper. There's nowhere to hide. Okay. I've already said paragraphs must be in chronological order. So think about it like you're telling a story. You're telling somebody a story. If I was to tell you a story of what I did yesterday, I wouldn't start with me going to bed in the evening. Okay, then what I did in the morning, then what I did in the afternoon, because it wouldn't really make sense. It'd be all over the place, wouldn't it? I'd start with what I did in the morning, what I did in the afternoon, what I when me going to bed. Okay, that's how I would tell the story. So it's got to be chronological order. We're doing some storytelling here. Then finally, your paragraphs must be linked together. So I've put that little picture of a chain just to help you to visualise so that you can think about when you're writing this question that we have to be linking them together. So what leads us to our next event? How are these two events linked? Okay, I'm doing it that at the start and end of paragraphs. Before we start actually writing this question, before we have a go at it together, let's have a quick think about planning this. So the first thing we need to think about, what is the question actually asking me about? What is the topic? So for this one, we're thinking about the peace conferences at the end of World War II. Okay, so at the very start of the Cold War, of course, we look at the peace conferences. Okay. Then we need to look at the dates in the question. This is key. It's really essential that you look at those dates. Sometimes it might give you a decade, like Dayton in the 1970s, okay, in which case you could use any events in Dayton in the 1970s. That's fine. Or the Second Cold War in the 1980s. Yeah, there's lots of stuff you could use. This one is quite specific, okay, 1943 to 1945, okay, for this one, it's fairly straightforward because there is only 3 peace conferences and they do all happen within those years. Then what we need to do is figure out what extra event do we need to come up with. Okay, so we're given Tehran in 1943, we're given Potsdam in 1945. You know what the third conference is? Yalta, okay, and where would that go? So it goes in between Tehran and Potsdam. So Yalta happened in February 1945 and Potsdam was July 1945. So we need to squeeze it in the middle. Okay, so we're going to start with a paragraph on Tehran, November 1943. Then we're going to talk about Yalta in February of 1945. Then we're going to be talking about Potsdam in July of 1945. Okay, so that's my chronological order sorted. So before you start the question in the exam, I would just take a highlighter into the exam with you and highlight what is the key topic they're asking me about. So you'd be highlighting peace conferences. What are the dates? So you'd highlight those dates carefully and then just add in your third bullet point in the correct place. So draw a little arrow to show, okay, let's talk about Yalta in the middle. Then you've got yourself a little plan. You've taken just 30 seconds to quickly think and plan it through before you dive into writing it. Okay. Right, let's have a quick look at a writing structure then before we start having a go at this. So let me show you how I would like you to structure this question. So begin your answer with the actual words in the question. So I always say to my students, reword what is in the question, reword the question back at them, give it back to them, show that you're focused on the question. You say something along the lines of the first key event to occur was the peace conference held in Tehran in November 1943. Okay, then you need to use lots of specific details to say who attended, what was discussed, what the outcome was. Okay, so you must finish after you've discussed a little bit about what actually happened at Tehran. So who was there, who were the big 3, what did they discuss, what did they manage to agree on, what did they not agree on. Okay, you then need to be able to link that to Yalta. So think about why they might have needed another conference in Yalta. So you could do something like another conference needed because they were not able to agree on everything, or the war was still going on, so they had to meet again. Okay. Then try to start your next paragraph on Yalta by once again linking it to Tehran. Okay, so thinking about these links all the time. You could say something like 15 months after the Tehran conference came the second peace conference held in Yalta in 1945. Okay, then you need to elaborate and expand on that and say what actually happened at Yalta. What did they manage to agree on? What did they not agree on? Who was there? Was there any tension between specific people? And once again, you must finish by saying how this conference in some way links or leads to, is connected to Potsdam. So you could say, for example, the war was still not over and they didn't manage to agree on certain things. Therefore, another conference was needed in July of 1945. Okay, then try to start your last paragraph on Potsdam by linking it back to Yalta. So, for example, saying something along the lines of, as a result of some of the discussions at Yalta not being properly settled, so for example, they had not agreed upon the amount of reparations Germany would pay, it was necessary for a third and final conference once the war was finally over. This was held in Potsdam in 1945. Okay, now at the very end of this paragraph, you need to kind of do a little summary sentence or two just to say what the overall outcome of Potsdam was. So was there any tensions that were created? If so, why? Was anyone feeling angry, aggravated, left out, aggrieved, etc.? So in your very last paragraph, it's a little bit of a different ending to the last two paragraphs because you've not got a fourth event to link it to. So you just need to summarise everything. What's the final outcome of these conferences? Is it going to lead to further tensions? Well, obviously, yes, it does, because this is really the start of the Cold War, isn't it? Okay. Right, now that we've had a look at the structure, I'll have a go at the first two paragraphs this time, just to demonstrate how we're going to link things together. Then you could try adding the final paragraph on Potsdam. Okay, so I'll read through with you my first two paragraphs, and you can get yourself a piece of paper, get your Cold War booklet out. This is in the very first Cold War booklet, and you can have a read through the information on Potsdam, highlight some stuff that you want to add in, and try and construct your own paragraph if you pause the video to do that. So this is my first paragraph. So I've said the green bit is my opening statement. But the first key event to occur was the peace conference held in Tehran in November 1943. The conference was arranged by the Grand Alliance in order to come up with a winning strategy to end the war. Okay, then all of this blue bit here, all of my information on what happened. I'm simply just telling the story of what happened at that conference. So I've said the three men in attendance were Roosevelt for the USA, Stalin for the USSR, and Churchill for Britain. Roosevelt was keen to improve relations within the Grand Alliance, so agreed to make Stalin happy by holding it in Tehran. Roosevelt and Stalin tended to agree on matters at this conference, whilst Churchill sometimes stood alone with his ideas. The meeting was generally successful, especially for Stalin, who achieved most of what he wanted. Stalin wanted land from eastern Poland, East Prussia, as it was called at the time. This would make Germany smaller, hence weaker. All of this was agreed to. They also all agreed to Britain and the USA opening up a second front to take the pressure off Russia by invading France in May 1944. The Soviet Union also agreed to wage a war against Germany's allies, Japan, once Germany were defeated. The creation of a United Nations was to be set up. However, Stalin didn't get everything he wanted, though. This is because during the conference, both Churchill and Stalin clashed on some key ideas. For example, Churchill wanted the Allies to invade Germany through the Balkan area of Eastern Europe. He knew by doing this that he would stop Stalin and his Red Army from taking over all of Eastern Europe after the war. This was rejected at Tehran, much to Churchill's annoyance. So this little red bit at the end is going to be my link to the next section. So due to some lack of agreement and the fact that the war was still going on, another conference would be needed later down the line. So that's my link. Okay, so I'm saying, as I've done my disagreements last in that paragraph, I'm basically summing up saying due to those disagreements, okay, and the fact that the war was still in full flow, there's still 2 more years of the war to go, they were going to need another conference further down the line to discuss what was going to happen with Germany. Okay. So this is my next paragraph on Tehran. So again, my green bit is I'm opening it up. So I've said 15 months after the Tehran conference in the second peace conference. This was held in Yalta in February 1945. So I have mentioned Tehran there. Okay, you could do a little bit of a stronger link if you wanted to by saying these things were not agreed at Tehran, therefore another one was needed in Yalta and the war was still going on. So again, my blue bit is what's actually happened at Yalta. So I said, by this point, the Allied armies were closing in on Berlin and Germany was close to defeat. The Big Three were still fearful of Hitler and for the most part were able to reach agreement on key issues. Stalin wanted Germany to pay huge reparations, but Roosevelt and Churchill agreed that it was not sensible to push Germany too harshly. Aside from this agreement, it became clear that at this conference, Stalin and Roosevelt got on well, and as a result, Churchill was left feeling isolated. They managed to agree on the following. The USSR would enter the war against Japan once Germany surrendered, to divide both Germany and Berlin, the capital, into 4 zones, to allow countries that had been liberated from occupation by the German army to have free elections to choose the government that they wanted, and finally, they agreed that Eastern Europe would now be a Soviet sphere of influence. This meant that the Soviet Union would have some sort of influence over how Eastern Europe was shaped after the war, as long as they chose their own government. Okay, now the red bit, once again, is my link. So I said they could not agree, though, on a number of small other issues. Since they agreed on how much Germany should pay in reparations, So they disagreed on how much Germany should pay in reparations. Stalin naturally wanted a much higher sum than either Churchill or Roosevelt. Consequently, this decision was to be settled in their next and final meeting in Potsdam. Okay, so I've just summarised one key issue that they couldn't agree on to lead on to my next one and mention Potsdam. Okay, so why don't you now pause the video? So now that you've seen how I've constructed the first two paragraphs and made those links at the start and end, if you wanted to do it in 3 different colours with your piece of paper, that would be a good thing to do. So a little opener to link it back to Yalta, what happened at Potsdam, and a little outcome summary at the end. Okay, so I'll leave that structure for you, and you can pause the video now to have a go yourself. Okay, what did you come up with then? So this was my paragraph on Potsdam. By the way, this is very, very detailed. I've literally included pretty much everything there is to possibly include on all of these peace conferences, just to show you a really, really detailed example. In the actual exam, you're not going to have that much time to write this much, okay? So please don't be overwhelmed by the amount of writing there is here and think, oh my God, I can't possibly manage that, or I can't possibly learn all of that information. I would just focus on getting 3 key things from the conferences into each paragraph, okay? So as you read in mine with me, this is everything you could have possibly included. So as long as you've included 3 of these key agreements that were made and done the summary in red at the bottom, then that's fine. That's absolutely fine. So I opened it with disagreements at Yalta in February 1945. The big 3 met once again in July 1945, once the war in Europe was over. So this blue bit here, as I've just said, is very detailed. So just make sure you've got a couple of these key points. I'd say at least 3 of these key points. There were some changes at this conference as Roosevelt had died and was replaced by his vice president, Harry Truman. Truman was totally different to Roosevelt and distrusted Stalin. He was convinced that the Soviet Union intended to take over the whole of Europe. He was therefore determined to stand up to Stalin at the conference. This meant that the dynamic at this final meeting was very different than the previous 2. By this point, the Soviet troops had liberated countries in Eastern Europe, but not removed their military presence as agreed. By July, the Soviets occupied large parts of this area, including Latvia, Lithuania, and Czechoslovakia, breaking another promise made at Yalta. Stalin set up a communist government in Poland. Stalin ignored protests made by Britain and the US. He insisted the control of Eastern Europe was a defensive measure against future attacks, whilst the West started to demilitarize. The Soviet army continued to grow. This led to the Western allies becoming very suspicious of Stalin. Despite this, some agreements were made. So Germany and Berlin were to be divided into 4 sectors. So as agreed at Yalta, this was once again agreed at Potsdam. The Soviet zone would be in East Germany, and the French, British, and US zones would be in the West. Germany was to pay reparations to the Allies in equipment and materials. Most of this would go to the Soviet Union, who had suffered the most. All Allies would join the United Nations, and Poland's border was to be moved westward, as it was suggested in Tehran in 1943. Right, so this little red bit is what's slightly different to the last 2 paragraphs, because the last 2 we were linking it to the next paragraph. We don't have another paragraph to link it to, so we need to summarise. Okay, so I've said, however, there continue to be disagreements. They continue to argue about the severity of treatment that Germany would receive. 20 million Russians had died during the war, so Stalin wanted to cripple Germany. Truman refused. He saw a revived Germany as a possible barrier to future Soviet expansion. They also differed in their views about free elections. Truman wanted free elections in Eastern Europe, however, Eastern Europe was still being occupied by the Soviets. Stalin refused to give in to Truman. In response, Truman became furious and developed a get tough policy against the Soviet Union. By July 1945, it was clear that the world was once again dividing, this time between 2 different ideologies: communism in the east and capitalism in the west. So then that final bit, we've just kind of set the scene a little bit there for what's going to happen next in the Cold War. Okay, so there's my link at the top, and then don't forget to subscribe to the Pre-Small History Hub.